Becoming dangerously smart is not about having the highest IQ, knowing the most facts, or sounding clever in conversations. It's about developing the kind of intelligence that quietly gives you advantage, an ability to read situations, anticipate outcomes, make fewer mistakes, and move through life with precision instead of confusion. When someone is dangerously smart, they stop being a passive participant in life and start becoming a strategist, one who chooses their moves instead of reacting to circumstances. In this audiobook, we will explore the mental tools, habits, and ways of thinking that elevate you beyond average reasoning. You will learn how clarity beats noise, how information becomes leverage, how emotional discipline shapes outcomes, and how the smartest people make decisions, communicate, observe, and build advantage. The goal is not for you to be admired intellectually, but to become effective, someone whose thinking produces results. You will notice that the most strategic minds do not rush, they do not panic. They see patterns where others see randomness, and they position themselves for outcomes instead of hoping for luck. These are learnable skills, and once you begin to adopt them, life changes in subtle yet powerful ways. Opportunities become visible, mistakes become preventable, and success becomes less dependent on chance. In this audiobook, we will think deeply, but we will also stay practical. Everything shared here is designed to be usable, ideas you can apply immediately in decision-making, relationships, business, learning, time management, and personal growth. If you're ready to stop guessing and start understanding, if you're ready to move from reacting to anticipating, and if you're ready to think like a strategist instead of just hoping life works out, then you're in the right place. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Start with clarity or stay confused forever. Clarity is the first step toward becoming dangerously smart, because without clarity, every other improvement becomes guesswork. When you're unclear, you don't know what to aim at. You don't know what matters. You don't know what to ignore. And without those distinctions, life becomes exhausting. You end up moving, but not progressing. Working, but not achieving. Thinking, but not understanding. Clarity removes that fog. It's the mental lens that makes everything sharper, simpler, and more strategic. And here's the truth. Most people eventually learn the hard way. Confusion is expensive. It wastes time, it wastes energy, and it makes you settle for whatever lands in front of you instead of what you truly want. Clarity is not just knowing what you want. It is knowing why you want it and what price you're willing to pay to get it. Without the why, your goals collapse under pressure. Without the price, your goals remain fantasies. And this is where dangerously smart people separate themselves. They don't just dream, they define. They don't just hope, they plan. They don't just react, they direct. They take the time to think. They take the time to decide what matters, and in what order. And once they choose, they move with purpose. One of the greatest advantages clarity gives you is the ability to say no. When you don't know what you're aiming at, everything looks like an opportunity. But when you do know, most things immediately reveal themselves as distractions, and distractions are the silent enemy of intelligent living. They don't always look harmful. Sometimes they look exciting. Sometimes they look profitable. Sometimes they feel urgent. But if they don't move you closer to what matters, they're just noise dressed up as options. Clarity protects you from that noise. Now, here's something important. Clarity doesn't appear by accident. It must be created. It must be earned. You earn clarity by thinking deeply, instead of rushing. You earn clarity by asking better questions. Questions like, what am I actually trying to achieve? What outcome do I want? What would success look like here? What would failure look like? What resources do I have? What resources do I lack? Who wins if I don't change? Who wins if I do? When you give your mind real questions, it gives you real answers, and real answers give you power. Notice how clarity simplifies decision-making. When you're clear, decisions become faster. When you're unclear, decisions become heavier. You hesitate, you overthink, you delay, you wait for permission, you wait for signs, you wait for something or someone to make the choice for you. And waiting is one of the most costly habits in life. Opportunities rarely wait. People rarely wait. Time never waits. Clarity cuts through that hesitation. Another advantage of clarity is emotional stability. When you know what you're doing and why, you don't panic every time there's friction or resistance. You don't abandon your plan because someone doubts you. You don't spiral into insecurity every time the results are slow. You expect turbulence because turbulence doesn't scare people who know where they're going. Only the lost panic when the weather changes. Becoming dangerously smart begins here because clarity is the foundation upon which every strategic improvement is built. Without clarity, strategy turns into improvisation. Without clarity, learning turns into trivia. Without clarity, effort turns into exhaustion. But with clarity, effort compounds. With clarity, learning translates into advantage. With clarity, decisions become intentional and intelligent. If you want to make your life harder than it needs to be, stay unclear. But if you want to make your life sharper, more strategic, and more effective, start with clarity. Define your target. Define your priorities. Define your boundaries. Because the moment you become clear, confusion loses its power over you. Chapter 2. Turn information into advantage. Information by itself is not power. If it were, the highest achievers in the world would simply be the ones who knew the most facts or consumed the most content. Yet that's not how life works. The people who win are the ones who know how to turn information into usable insight, into leverage, into strategy, into advantage. That's what makes someone dangerously smart. They don't just collect information, they convert it. We live in a time where information is everywhere, and because it's everywhere, it's easy to drown in it. You can scroll for hours, watch videos for hours, read articles for hours, and still not get smarter, still not make better decisions, still not move forward. That's because information without direction becomes noise, and noise doesn't help you, it distracts you. To get smarter, you need a filter, you need a purpose, you need a way to decide what's useful and what's just entertainment, disguised as learning. Dangerously smart people don't chase random information, they look for patterns, they look for principles, and they look for relevance. Relevance matters. Knowledge that is not relevant to your goals has no strategic value. It might be interesting to know, it might make you sound clever at a party, but it won't help you become effective. Real intelligence respects priorities. Here's something most people never think about. Every piece of information has a different purpose. Some information helps you make faster decisions. Some helps you avoid mistakes. Some helps you recognize opportunities. Some helps you understand people. And some helps you understand yourself. The key is learning to categorize information instead of letting it blend into a single blob of random facts. Let's slow down here for a moment, because this matters. Smart people don't just ask, "What is this?" They ask, "How can I use this?" That single shift changes everything. When you start seeing information as potential leverage, your brain stops being a storage unit and becomes a processing center. And processing centers are more valuable than storage units. For example, financial information can help you make better investment decisions. Career information can help you navigate your industry. Psychological information can help you read behavior. And strategic information can help you plan moves ahead. When you understand the purpose of information, you start pairing it with action, and knowledge paired with action becomes power. Another advantage dangerously smart people have is that they're always connecting dots. When most people learn something new, it sits isolated in their mind, like a single puzzle piece. But when strategic thinkers learn something new, they immediately ask themselves, where does this fit? They match patterns, they compare, they integrate, they look for second-order effects. Over time, those connections form maps, mental maps of how things work. And once you have mental maps, the world stops being confusing. This is important for another reason. Maps help you navigate. Without maps, you get lost. Without maps, you rely on guessing. Without maps, you depend on luck. But when you have maps, decisions become easier. You know where you are, you know where you're going, and you know what paths exist between those 2 points. The most intelligent minds don't just learn, they organize what they learn. Now let's talk about the enemy of intelligent learning, passive consumption. Passive consumption feels like learning. It gives you the sensation of progress, but sensation is not the same as improvement. Passive consumption is like eating without digesting. You're full, but you're not nourished. You have more, but you're not better. To become dangerously smart, you must move from passive learning to active learning. Active learning is when you pause, reflect, question, analyze and apply. It's slower than passive consumption, but vastly more powerful. Here's another habit smart thinkers develop. They take notes, but not just any notes. They don't write down everything. They write down patterns, frameworks, and insights. They summarize concepts in their own words, because summarizing forces understanding. And once you understand something deeply, you never really lose it. Dangerously smart people also learn from other people, both directly and indirectly. They observe how successful people think, how they solve problems, how they make decisions, how they respond under pressure. They pay attention to behaviors, not just words. The world becomes their classroom, and when you treat the world as a classroom, opportunities to learn appear everywhere, because everything becomes data: wins, losses, failures, mistakes, conversations, industries, markets, relationships, trends, and even silence. At a higher level, information becomes advantage when you combine 3 skills: acquisition, interpretation, and application. Acquisition gives you raw material. Interpretation gives you understanding. Application gives you results. If any of the 3 are missing, the system breaks. If you acquire but don't interpret, you have noise. If you interpret but don't apply, you have theory. If you apply without acquisition or interpretation, you have blind action. Intelligence requires all 3. To close this chapter, remember one thing: information ages quickly, but insight compounds. And the people who become dangerously smart are the ones who learn to extract insight, not just accumulate data. They know how to think, not just what to think. And once you learn how to think, life becomes a game you can finally play with strategy instead of confusion, intention instead of impulse, and advantage instead of hope. Chapter 3. Play long-term games in a short-term world. If you want to become dangerously smart, you must learn to think beyond the moment. Most of the suffering, confusion, and stress people experience comes from reacting to the short term. They want quick relief, quick rewards, quick validation, and quick progress. The problem is that the quick path is almost always the shallow path. It gives you speed, but not distance. It gives you sensation, but not transformation. Long-term thinking requires patience, but it builds results that last and results that compound. And compounding is one of the most powerful forces a smart person can use. Let's pause on that word for a second. Compounding. Compounding is not just a financial concept. It applies to skills, relationships, reputation, knowledge, habits, health, discipline, credibility, and even opportunities. When you think long-term, you allow compounding to work in your favor. When you think short-term, you interrupt compounding just as it's about to get interesting. This is why so many people never get extraordinary results. They quit too early, they change direction too frequently, or they panic too easily. And panic is the enemy of progress. Playing long-term games means valuing endurance over excitement. It means building systems instead of chasing events. It means positioning yourself for where you want to be, not where it's easiest to stand today. And here's the paradox. The long-term thinkers eventually win the short-term game too. Why? Because they make fewer desperate decisions, they build real competence, and they accumulate advantage quietly over time. By the time others are waking up to the opportunity, the long-term thinkers have already positioned themselves for it. Let's talk about attention for a moment. The world today is optimized for short-term stimulation, notifications everywhere, constant updates, endless entertainment, instant communication, fast results. On the surface, this seems convenient, but underneath, it makes people mentally fragile. They lose the ability to sit with discomfort, to wait, to focus deeply, to build something brick by brick. Dangerous intelligence requires exactly the opposite. It requires the ability to delay gratification, to sit with ambiguity, and to think in horizons instead of impulses. When you think long-term, you stop asking, what feels good right now, and start asking, what will matter in 5 years? That single shift creates different choices. You treat relationships differently. You treat your career differently. You treat your learning differently. You especially treat your mistakes differently. Short-term thinkers hide their mistakes to protect their ego. Long-term thinkers study their mistakes to protect their future. Playing long-term games also changes how you interact with people. When you think long-term, you value trust over transaction. You make decisions that strengthen your reputation instead of damaging it for quick wins. You invest in relationships instead of extracting from them. And over time, that builds a network of allies, not just contacts. Allies are powerful. Allies open doors. Allies vouch for you. Allies warn you about threats before they arrive. Allies create opportunities you could never manufacture alone. That's long-term leverage. Another area where long-term thinking creates advantage is skill building. Most people want to be good quickly, so they look for shortcuts. But shortcuts produce shallow skill. Long-term thinkers aren't afraid of the boring fundamentals. They're not in a hurry to be impressive. They're in a hurry to be capable. And capability is priceless. Capable people can adapt. Capable people can pivot. Capable people stay valuable, no matter the environment. In a world that changes rapidly, adaptability is the real currency. Here's another interesting truth. Long-term thinking makes you emotionally stronger. When you operate in short-term mode, every setback feels catastrophic because it's judged within a tiny window. But when you think long-term, setbacks become data. A failed attempt is just one iteration out of many. A slow season is just a chapter, not the entire book. Emotional volatility decreases because perspective increases, and emotional stability is one of the greatest forms of intelligence because it preserves clarity under pressure. Thinking long-term also changes your relationship with time itself. You stop seeing time as something you spend and start seeing time as something you invest. If you spend time, the best case is that you enjoyed it. The worst case is that you wasted it. But if you invest time, you expect a return. And returns come in many forms: skill returns, knowledge returns, health returns, financial returns, opportunity returns, relationship returns. Time becomes a tool, not just something you watch pass by. Now here's the twist. Playing long-term games isn't about waiting forever without action. It's about acting now, so that the future becomes easier. Dangerous intelligence is not passive intelligence. It's intentional intelligence. It's doing things today that make tomorrow richer in options and lighter in stress. And the earlier you adopt this mindset, the more powerful the compounding becomes. Starting late is still better than never starting, but starting early creates exponential results. And this brings us to a final point worth emphasizing. Long-term thinking requires faith in the unseen. You don't always see immediate proof that what you're doing is working. You don't always get applause. You don't always feel progress. And that's why so many people quit, not because the path doesn't work, but because it works quietly at first. But quietly is how compounding always begins. Loud is how it ends. And the people who become dangerously smart are the ones who can endure the quiet long enough to enjoy the loud. Chapter 4. Train your pattern recognition. One of the most underestimated signs of true intelligence is the ability to recognize patterns, not just to notice events, but to connect them, not just to observe what people do, but to understand why they do it and what they will likely do next. When you develop pattern recognition, life stops feeling random, outcomes stop feeling mysterious. You begin to predict instead of react. And prediction, even partial prediction, gives you a tremendous strategic advantage. Everything in life has patterns. Markets have patterns. Human behavior has patterns. Conflict has patterns. Success has patterns. Failure has patterns. Health has patterns. Relationships have patterns. Even emotions have patterns. The people who feel constantly blindsided by life are usually the ones who haven't learned to look beyond the immediate moment. They judge things by how they appear, not by how they develop. Smart thinkers judge things by trajectories. They don't just ask, what is happening? They ask, where is this leading? That question alone separates amateurs from strategists, because what matters most in life is not the event itself, but the direction the event is pointing toward. A habit repeated is a pattern forming. A pattern forming is a future being created. That's why dangerously smart people pay attention early. They don't wait for consequences to become unavoidable. They adjust when the signals are subtle, not when the damage is obvious. Pattern recognition also makes you less emotional when dealing with people. When you understand patterns, you stop taking everything personally. You stop interpreting people's actions as isolated incidents and start seeing them as part of a behavioral script. Someone who avoids accountability will avoid it again. Someone who blames will keep blaming. Someone who lies will lie again. Someone who does the bare minimum will continue doing the bare minimum. Once you see the pattern, their behavior loses its power to frustrate you. This also protects you from manipulation. People who can't recognize patterns are easy to mislead because they judge every situation as if it's new. They fall for the same stories, the same promises, the same emotional hooks. People who recognize patterns learn quickly. They don't need to experience pain 10 times to understand what's happening. Once is data, twice is confirmation, 3 times is a rule. Pattern recognition is also one of the foundations of strategic decision-making. Great investors, great negotiators, great leaders, great communicators, great thinkers, they all rely heavily on patterns. They observe the past to predict the future, not because the future will be identical, but because human behavior and systemic dynamics rarely change as much as people pretend. Circumstances change, tools change, styles change, but the underlying human drivers, fear, greed, ambition, insecurity, curiosity, pride, love, and self-preservation, remain remarkably consistent. Here's where it gets interesting. Pattern recognition is not something you're either born with or not. It is trainable. It begins with paying attention and slowing down your interpretation. Most people jump to conclusions instantly. They react quickly, label quickly, categorize quickly, but fast labeling kills pattern detection. To detect patterns, you need to observe without rushing to explain. You need to notice repetition. You need to ask, have I seen something like this before? Under what conditions? With what results? Another powerful way to develop pattern recognition is to learn across domains. When you learn from different fields, psychology, business, history, strategy, communication, you start seeing how principles repeat. For example, you might notice that winners in business are often the ones who can delay gratification, just like winners in fitness or winners in investing. The domain changes, but the pattern stays the same. The more cross-domain knowledge you build, the more transferable your pattern recognition becomes. Now let's talk about feedback loops. Patterns become clear when you track outcomes over time. If you never measure anything, you never notice repetition. This applies to your own behavior too. If every year feels the same, it's not because the world isn't changing, it's because your patterns aren't changing. You keep choosing the same actions, the same reactions, the same habits. Leaders and top performers study their own patterns as critically as they study external ones. They ask, what keeps happening to me, and why? That question alone can save someone 5 years of repeating the same cycle. Pattern recognition also affects how you interpret opportunities. Some people get lucky once and don't know why it happened. They can't repeat the success because they don't understand the pattern behind it. Others build success systematically because they understand not only what worked, but why it worked. And if you understand why something works, you can recreate it, improve it, and scale it. That's how advantage is built intelligently, not accidentally. There's another benefit worth mentioning. Pattern recognition reduces fear. When the world feels random, fear increases. When the world feels structured, fear decreases. Even if the structure isn't perfect, even if the prediction isn't guaranteed, the mere act of understanding trajectories creates psychological stability. You stop feeling like life is happening to you and start feeling like you are interacting with a system you can learn, adapt to, and influence. To become dangerously smart, you must train your eyes to see repetition, your mind to see cause and effect, and your memory to store lessons rather than just events. Because when you learn to recognize patterns, life opens up in new ways. You become harder to deceive, harder to surprise, harder to discourage, and much harder to stop. Chapter 5. Outsmart problems by anticipating them. One of the greatest advantages dangerously smart people have is not that they solve problems faster, it's that they prevent many problems from ever appearing in the first place. They look ahead, they anticipate, they pay attention to the early signals that most people ignore, and this changes the way they move through life. Instead of constantly putting out fires, they build systems that keep fires from starting. Instead of reacting in panic, they prepare quietly. Prevention is one of the most underrated forms of intelligence because it doesn't feel dramatic, but it is incredibly powerful. Think about it. Solving a problem costs time, energy, and resources. Preventing a problem preserves time, energy, and resources. Prevention protects momentum. It protects confidence. It protects clarity. And yet many people operate with the "I'll handle it when it happens" mindset. They wait for emergencies. They wait for pain. They wait for consequences. And by the time they finally respond, the problem has usually multiplied, financially, emotionally, or socially. Anticipation is smarter than repair. To anticipate problems, you have to train yourself to think beyond the immediate moment. You have to ask, if I continue on this path, what happens next? Or if I make this decision, what could go wrong? These are not negative questions, they are strategic questions. There's a big difference between negativity and foresight. Negativity focuses on fear, foresight focuses on preparation. One drains you, the other protects you. Dangerously smart thinkers run simulations in their head, not complex, mathematical simulations, practical ones. They visualize scenarios, consequences, and responses. They consider alternatives and contingencies. Contingency planning is a hallmark of intelligent decision-making. It ensures that when life pushes back, the push doesn't break you. When you have options, pressure decreases. When you lack options, pressure increases. Now let's talk about patterns again, because patterns are deeply connected to anticipation. Problems rarely appear without warning. There are always early indicators, subtle behaviors, small inconsistencies, quiet discomfort, little mistakes, recurring delays. People who end up blindsided usually ignored the early signs. The signs were there, they just didn't want to see them. Smart thinkers look for weak signals. They don't wait for the crisis to become loud. Anticipation also requires emotional discipline. Most people don't think ahead, because thinking ahead forces them to face uncomfortable truths. It reveals vulnerabilities. It exposes risks. It makes them admit that their current situation may not be sustainable. But suppression is not a strategy. Avoidance is not intelligence. Facing reality early gives you more time to adapt, and adaptation is often the difference between survival and failure. One of the most practical methods for anticipating problems is to reverse your thinking. Instead of asking, "How do I succeed?" ask, "How do I fail?" This is a mental model known as inversion. It forces you to identify failure points, the things most likely to ruin your plans. Once you identify them, you can build safeguards. This approach is used by engineers, investors, military strategists, and high-level decision-makers. It works in everyday life too. If you can eliminate the obvious failure points, success becomes dramatically easier. Let's explore another angle: problem anticipation in relationships and communication. Many conflicts don't come out of nowhere. They come from unclear agreements, unmet expectations, poor boundaries, or ignored signals. Smart communicators anticipate emotional responses before they speak. They think about how their words might be received, how someone might interpret their intentions, and what outcomes those interpretations might produce. Communication becomes strategic rather than impulsive. In business, anticipation is even more crucial. Entire industries have been disrupted because the leaders failed to anticipate changes in technology, consumer behavior, or competition. Meanwhile, the strategic leaders saw the shift coming early and positioned themselves. They made moves before the demand arrived, not after. That's what makes the difference between being reactive and being ahead of the curve. But there's a final aspect to anticipation that people rarely talk about: anticipating your own weaknesses. It's easy to point out external risks, much harder to acknowledge internal risks: procrastination, ego, impatience, ignorance, stubbornness, emotional impulsiveness. Most of the problems people face are not caused by the outside world. They are caused by their own habits colliding with reality. When you anticipate your own flaws, you give yourself a chance to correct before they sabotage you. And that may be the highest form of prevention. Let's be clear, anticipation will not eliminate all problems. Life will always have surprises. But it will eliminate unnecessary problems, the ones that drain you, delay you, and discourage you. And every unnecessary problem you prevent gives you more room to pursue meaningful goals instead of constantly repairing damage. That's why dangerously smart people seem to move through life with more ease. It's not that their path is easier, it's that they learned how to avoid creating additional friction along the way. To outsmart problems is to think ahead. To think ahead is to respect reality. And to respect reality is to accept that the smartest move is often the one that prevents the chaos from ever starting. Chapter 6. Make decisions like a chess player. Decisions determine your direction, and direction determines your destiny. If you want to become dangerously smart, you must elevate the way you make decisions. Most people decide based on convenience, impulse, or emotion. Chess players decide based on position, outcome, and strategy. They don't just ask, "What should I do right now?" They ask, "What will this move create 3 steps from now?" That difference alone separates amateurs from strategists in every area of life. Chess is a useful metaphor because it teaches something vital. A good move is not just good in the moment. It is good in the sequence. Many people make decisions that look good instantly but collapse later. They take shortcuts for short-term benefits that carry long-term costs. Others make decisions that feel difficult in the moment, but create long-term openings. When you shift your decision-making from emotional impulse to strategic thinking, life stops feeling random and starts feeling intentional. Strategic decision-making begins with awareness of the board. In chess, you need to know where the pieces are before you decide where to move. In life, the board includes your environment, your resources, your relationships, your weaknesses, your opportunities, and your constraints. A move made without understanding the board is just guessing. Guessing might occasionally work, but consistency comes from clarity. Once you have awareness, the next layer is foresight. Chess players don't just think about their own move, they think about how others will respond to it. They anticipate counter moves. In life, every decision has a ripple effect. When you speak, people respond. When you make a financial move, the market responds. When you set a boundary, others adjust. When you change a habit, your environment reacts. Strategic thinkers ask, "If I do this, what happens next? And then, and after that?" This ability to simulate outcomes is what turns decisions into strategy, instead of chance. Another principle from chess that applies to life is the distinction between trading and sacrificing. A trade is when you exchange one resource for another, of similar value. A sacrifice is when you give up something valuable now to gain something more valuable later. Most breakthroughs in life require sacrifice. You might sacrifice comfort for growth, time for skill, ego for feedback, or short-term enjoyment for long-term freedom. Short-term thinkers avoid sacrifice because they focus on what they lose. Long-term thinkers embrace sacrifice because they focus on what they gain. Chess also teaches restraint. Not every opportunity must be taken. Not every opening is worth pursuing. Some positions are traps disguised as options. In life, these traps show up as shiny distractions, easy money, fast validation, or shortcuts that bypass the real work. Strategic people learn to pause instead of pounce. The pause buys them time to observe, and observation prevents regret. Another key layer of strategic intelligence is knowing the difference between tactics and strategy. Tactics are short-term actions that solve immediate problems. Strategy is the long-term plan that defines your direction. Many people drown in tactics. They put out fires all day, handle tasks all day, and worry all day, yet make no real progress, because their actions serve no strategy. Chess players use tactics to serve a larger plan. Life works exactly the same way. Without strategy, tactics become busy work. With strategy, tactics become progress. Now let's talk about the emotional side of decision-making. Good decisions require clarity, and clarity collapses under strong emotion. Fear makes you overestimate risks. Anger makes you underestimate consequences. Excitement makes you ignore warning signs. Impulsiveness makes you skip analysis entirely. Strategic thinkers know when not to decide. Sometimes the smartest move is to wait until emotion settles. A delayed decision is not the same as indecision. A delayed decision can be a strategic choice that prevents long-term damage. Another useful mental habit is second-order thinking. First-order thinking asks, what happens if I do this? Second-order thinking asks, and then what happens because of that? Most bad decisions come from ignoring second-order consequences. For example, quitting a job impulsively might make you feel free today, but stressed next month. Saying yes to every request might make you light today, but exhausted later. Eating for pleasure today might cost you your health in the future. The smartest thinkers look beyond the first consequence. Strategic decision-making also involves resource allocation. Time, energy, attention, and willpower are limited resources. You cannot invest equally in everything, so you must decide where the highest returns are. Not all moves on the board are equal. Some decisions change nothing, some change everything. Smart thinkers protect their best resources for high-impact moves, instead of wasting them on trivial battles. And finally, decisions must align with positioning. In chess, a piece is powerful, not because of the piece itself, but because of where it is placed. In life, talent matters, but positioning multiplies talent. Being in the right industry, the right network, the right environment, the right timing, these amplify decisions. Smart people choose their environment strategically, instead of leaving them to chance. They don't just ask, what move should I make? They ask, where should I be playing? When you start making decisions like a chess player, your life becomes less about reacting and more about orchestrating. You stop living move to move and start living strategy to strategy. And that shift from impulse to intention is one of the core signs of becoming dangerously smart. Chapter 7. Upgrade your inputs. Upgrade your thinking. Your mind cannot produce anything beyond what you feed into it. Just like a machine cannot output higher quality than the materials it processes, the human mind cannot generate strong ideas, strong decisions, or strong strategies if it's operating on weak input. If you want to become dangerously smart, you must upgrade what you consume, not just content, but conversations, environments, and even problems. Yes, problems too. Because the level of problems you engage with determines the level of solutions you learn how to create. Let's start with information. Most people consume information for entertainment, not for enhancement. They scroll, they watch, they skim, and they absorb a constant stream of trivia. It feels stimulating, but it changes nothing. The mind is busy, but not better. For information to make you smarter, it must challenge you, stretch you, or refine you. Light information is like light food. It tastes good, but doesn't nourish. You need heavier inputs, books that make you think, ideas that make you uncomfortable, perspectives that challenge your assumptions. That's the material your mind uses to construct higher-level thinking. But upgrading inputs is not limited to books and lectures. One of the most influential inputs in your life is conversation. Conversations shape beliefs, and beliefs shape behavior. Spend enough time around people who complain, and you begin to complain. Spend enough time around people who plan, and you begin to plan. Spend enough time around people who build, and you begin to build. The mind absorbs the dominant energy around it. That's why dangerously smart thinkers are careful with who they surround themselves with, not because they're elitist, but because they understand mental contagion. Thoughts spread, behaviors spread, standards spread. Now let's talk about environments. Your environment affects your thinking, even when you're not aware of it. Clutter creates distraction. Noise creates shallowness. Pressure creates anxiety. On the other hand, order creates clarity. Silence creates reflection. Challenge creates growth. A strategic mind does not form well in a chaotic environment. People often try to upgrade themselves without upgrading where they operate. But place matters. Your environment either reinforces your goals or erodes them. It either strengthens your thinking or weakens it. Here's something less obvious but extremely important. The types of problems you engage with are also inputs. If you spend your life dealing with small problems, petty arguments, insecurities, gossip, jealousy, drama, you never develop the cognitive bandwidth to handle bigger challenges. Your mental capacity gets tied up in the trivial. Smart people outgrow small problems by refusing to fuel them. They conserve their mental resources for real challenges: building, designing, creating, strategizing, improving, scaling, connecting, learning. Those are the problems that upgrade your thinking. Upgrading inputs also means upgrading the level of questions you ask. Weak questions create weak answers. Strong questions force the brain to search for deeper explanations. For example, asking "Why is this happening to me?" produces a victim-oriented answer. Asking "What is this trying to teach me?" turns the same situation into insight. Asking "What is the real problem here?" cuts through complexity. Questions are prompts that shape cognition. The brain answers whatever you ask it, so ask better questions. Let's address another modern input challenge: information overload. Consuming more is not the same as consuming better. In fact, consuming more often destroys clarity. The more noise your brain processes, the less signal it detects. The dangerously smart don't just upgrade inputs, they curate them. They filter aggressively, they choose depth over volume, they value comprehension over consumption. They adopt the mindset: better inputs, fewer distractions. Another powerful input is mentorship, direct or indirect. A mentor upgrades your thinking by compressing decades of insight into moments. Even if you never meet the person, you can learn from their biographies, their interviews, their failures, their frameworks. This gives you leverage. You don't have to repeat mistakes the world has already documented. You can skip stages through exposure. Now let's look at habits as inputs. Your daily habits feed your brain. Sleep affects memory and reasoning. Movement affects energy and focus. Nutrition affects clarity and mood. Most people underestimate how biological their intelligence is. You cannot think strategically when your body is depleted. You cannot plan your future when your physiology is in survival mode. The mind is not separate from the body. One fuels the other. Finally, upgrading inputs means upgrading standards. Life rises to the standard you demand of it. If your standard is comfort, you will filter for ease. If your standard is challenge, you will filter for growth. Standards are invisible filters that determine what you notice, what you tolerate, and what you pursue. When you raise your standards, your inputs change automatically. You no longer enjoy low-quality conversations, low-quality distractions, or low-quality thinking. It stops feeling satisfying. It starts feeling expensive. The bottom line is simple: to change how you think, change what you feed the mind. Upgrade the inputs, and the outputs upgrade with them. A dangerously smart mind is not born. It is built, and it is built from the information it absorbs. The people it listens to, the environments it operates in, the questions it asks, and the problems it chooses to engage with. When you control these inputs, intelligence stops being accidental and starts becoming engineered. Chapter 8. Use mental models to think faster and better. Becoming dangerously smart is not about having more information in your head. It's about having better frameworks for processing information. That's where mental models come in. A mental model is simply a way of understanding how the world works. It's a tool for thinking. It's a lens for making decisions. It's a shortcut for solving problems. With the right mental models, you don't just think more, you think better and faster, with fewer mistakes and less confusion. Mental models are valuable because most people make decisions from instinct alone, without structure. They rely on impulse, habit, or emotion. But when you operate without a framework, you are forced to reinvent how to think every time a new situation appears. That is exhausting. Strategy requires efficiency, and efficiency requires tools. Mental models are those tools. Let's start with one of the most powerful mental models. First principles thinking. First principles require you to strip away assumptions and ask, what is actually true here? Instead of copying what others do, you break things down to their fundamentals. This model prevents you from accepting limitations that don't actually exist. It's how innovators create breakthroughs, not by improving old answers, but by asking original questions. Another important model is second-order thinking. Most decisions look fine when you only consider the first outcome. But real intelligence comes from asking, and then what? Second-order effects are the consequences of the consequences. For example, buying something cheap saves money now, but costs more later. Complaining brings relief now, but weakens resilience later. Praising effort encourages growth long-term, while praising talent might cripple it. When you think in second and third steps, you naturally make smarter long-term decisions. Then there is inversion. Inversion asks you to flip the problem around. Instead of asking, how do I succeed, you ask, how do I fail? Instead of asking, how do I keep customers, you ask, what would make customers leave? Inversion works because failure often has clearer causes than success. By avoiding what leads to failure, you create pathways to success automatically. It is one of the simplest and most practical models for everyday life. Another mental model dangerously smart people use is opportunity cost. This model reminds you that every choice has a hidden cost, what you could have done instead. If you spend time on entertainment, the opportunity cost is growth. If you spend money on status, the opportunity cost is investing. The smartest thinkers are not afraid to say no, not because they lack interest, but because they respect the cost of their yes. One more foundational model is probability thinking. Life is uncertain, and people who demand certainty before acting rarely move at all. Probability thinking allows you to make decisions without guarantees. You ask, what is the likelihood this works? And what's the reward if I'm right? And the cost if I'm wrong? This model protects you from gambling and paralysis. It lets you act with clarity in uncertain environments. Of course, not all mental models are analytical. Some are psychological. For example, confirmation bias teaches you that humans tend to seek information that supports their beliefs and avoid information that challenges them. Knowing this helps you correct your own thinking before bias distorts your judgment. Another psychological model is loss aversion, which explains why people fear losing more than they enjoy winning. Understanding loss aversion helps you understand why people avoid change even when change would benefit them. Smart thinkers don't memorize mental models to sound intelligent. They use them to navigate reality more effectively. They build a toolbox. They know that no single model works for every situation. Life is too complex for one tool. As the saying goes, if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Dangerous intelligence requires variety, different tools for different problems. Here's another benefit. Mental models reduce emotional decision-making. When you have frameworks, emotion becomes information, not instruction. The model guides you, the emotion informs you. That's how you stay rational under pressure. That's how you become consistent instead of unpredictable. But there's something even more powerful than individual models, the ability to combine them. When first principles thinking meets opportunity cost, or when inversion meets probability, or when second-order thinking meets loss aversion, your intelligence compounds. Combination increases accuracy. It increases foresight. It increases advantage. Training yourself in mental models also changes how you learn. Instead of memorizing facts, you extract the underlying mechanics. You don't just ask, what happened? You ask, what principle made that outcome inevitable? That shift transforms you from someone who knows answers into someone who understands processes. And understanding processes makes you adaptable. When environments change, you adjust quickly, because your thinking isn't tied to a single context. Finally, the more mental models you use, the more you realize that reality is structured. It's not random chaos. There are patterns, incentives, and forces influencing everything around you. When you learn those forces, you stop being surprised by outcomes. You stop being manipulated by emotion. You stop being overwhelmed by complexity. You start thinking clearly, acting strategically, and moving through life with quiet advantage. Mental models don't make you robotic. They make you effective. They allow you to think in frameworks instead of reactions. And when you can think faster and better, you get ahead in a world where most people are simply trying to keep up. Chapter 9. Observe more. Talk less. Understand better. One of the most underestimated forms of intelligence is observation, not the passive kind, but the focused kind, the kind that pays attention to details, patterns, reactions, motives, timing, context, and outcomes. When you observe deeply, you begin to understand how the world actually works, instead of how you wish it worked. You begin to see what people truly mean, instead of what they say, and you begin to anticipate situations, instead of being surprised by them. Talking has its place, but observing gives you the data that talking requires. Observation builds understanding. Talking simply broadcasts it. People who talk too much reveal too much. They reveal their intentions, their fears, their priorities, their insecurities, and their desires. People who observe, on the other hand, collect those revelations. The less you speak, the more information you have, and the more strategically you can act. This doesn't mean becoming silent or withholding. It means valuing information intake before information output. Smart communication starts with understanding, and understanding starts with observation. When you observe, you're not just watching, you're interpreting. For example, noticing how someone treats someone who can't benefit them tells you more about their character than how they treat someone they're trying to impress. Noticing who speaks first in a negotiation tells you who's trying to control the frame. Noticing how someone responds to pressure tells you whether they're equipped for responsibility. Intelligence isn't always about giving the right answers. Sometimes it's about seeing the right things. Observation also protects you from illusions. People often make the mistake of taking situations at face value. They assume success means someone is competent. They assume confidence means someone is capable. They assume talk means action. But when you observe closely, you learn that life is full of false signals. Some people win because of timing, not talent. Some people sound knowledgeable, but have no depth. Some situations look chaotic, but are actually predictable. The ability to see past appearances is one of the most valuable forms of intelligence. To develop stronger observational skills, you must slow down your default interpretation. Most people analyze too quickly. They label too quickly. They judge too quickly. Rapid interpretation feels efficient, but it reduces accuracy. Being dangerously smart requires not just speed of thought, but precision of thought. Precision requires patience. You give yourself enough space to ask, what's really happening here? What's driving this behavior? What are the incentives? What are the unspoken rules? One of the most useful areas to apply observation is in conflict. When tensions rise, People reveal their genuine values. The calm reveal their discipline. The insecure reveal their ego. The manipulative reveal their tactics. The honest reveal their integrity. You learn more about a person in 5 minutes of conflict than in 5 hours of casual conversation. Quiet observers gain a psychological advantage because they gather information while others are too busy reacting emotionally. Observation also applies to timing. In many situations, timing matters more than talent. Saying the right thing at the wrong time is the same as saying the wrong thing. Making a bold move too early is the same as being unprepared. Taking action too late is the same as missing the opportunity. Observing timing teaches you humility because it forces you to recognize that success often belongs not to the strongest or the smartest, but to the one who recognizes when the time is right. Another helpful practice is to observe without the need to insert yourself. Watch all sick to a des, without the need to insert yourself. Many people listen only to reply. They watch only to judge. They enter conversations only to share their own experiences. But you learn far more by letting the moment unfold without interference. It allows you to gather clean data that has not been distorted by your ego, your biases, or your desire to be included. Strategic people are comfortable not being the center of attention. In fact, they often prefer it. Talking less also builds mystique. In a world filled with noise, quietness stands out. The quieter you are, the more others project their assumptions onto you, assumptions that often serve you. People reveal more when they don't feel competed with. They reveal plans. They reveal motives. They reveal weaknesses. Silence creates space, and space encourages disclosure. The loud impress, the quiet extract. Now let's connect observation to learning. Observation accelerates learning because it reduces the number of mistakes you have to make yourself. You don't always need direct experience. You can learn from the failures, miscalculations, and victories of others just by watching closely. Every industry, every environment, every social setting contains lessons for the observer. The world becomes a classroom, and life becomes your instructor. This chapter closes with a simple truth. Intelligence is not just about knowing more, it's about perceiving more. The person who sees clearly understands deeply. The person who understands deeply makes better decisions, and the person who makes better decisions gains better outcomes. Observing more and talking less is not about being silent, it's about being prepared. It's about gathering enough data to act strategically, speak wisely, and move through life with awareness instead of guessing. Chapter 10. Master emotional control to avoid dumb decisions. Intelligence collapses the moment emotion takes over, not because emotion is bad, but because intense emotion narrows perception. When you are afraid, you see only danger. When you are angry, you see only offense. When you are excited, you see only opportunity. Emotion hijacks the brain's ability to evaluate reality, and when reality is distorted, decisions become reckless. If you want to become dangerously smart, you must learn to maintain your clarity while the world tries to provoke you. You must learn to think before reacting, to respond instead of explode, and to stay steady when others fall apart. Smart thinking is not just analytical, it is emotional. It requires mastery over impulses, urges, and triggers. Consider how many disastrous decisions in history came not from lack of intelligence, but from lack of restraint. Wasted money from impulse purchases, relationships destroyed out of anger, careers derailed out of pride, opportunities missed out of fear. Emotional reactions often feel powerful in the moment, but create regret in the aftermath. The damage becomes visible later, when the emotion is gone and clarity returns, but the consequences remain. Dangerously smart people protect themselves from this pattern by building emotional distance between stimulus and response. They don't rush to react. They don't speak immediately. They don't escalate conflict without purpose. They don't make financial decisions when euphoric or panicked. They wait for the emotional surge to settle, so the rational mind can catch up. This simple habit prevents countless bad outcomes. Delayed reactions are not signs of weakness. They are signs of control. Control comes from awareness. You cannot manage what you cannot detect. Most people only realize they acted emotionally after the damage is done. Smart thinkers learn to recognize their own triggers. They study how their body reacts, how their mind tightens, how their focus narrows. Once you can recognize the onset of emotion, you can interrupt the automatic response. That interruption is the opening through which strategy enters. Let's talk about fear for a moment. Fear shrinks possibilities. It stops people from taking risks, from speaking honestly, from moving toward their goals. But fear does not always signal danger. Sometimes it signals growth. Sometimes it signals uncertainty. Sometimes it signals lack of experience. Dangerously smart thinkers don't ask, "How do I get rid of fear?" They ask, "What is this fear trying to tell me? Is it protecting me, or is it limiting me?" That distinction turns fear from an enemy into data. Anger is another emotion that derails intelligence. Anger compresses time. It pushes people into immediate action, action that feels righteous in the moment but foolish afterward. To master anger is not to suppress it, but to channel it. Anger has energy. It has clarity. It has urgency. When directed toward improvement instead of retaliation, it becomes fuel for growth. When directed toward revenge or ego, it becomes destruction. Emotional mastery is choosing where the energy goes. Then there is excitement. Excitement feels positive, but it is just as dangerous for decision-making. Excitement blinds people to cost, to risk, to long-term impact. It creates exaggerated confidence. It pushes people into commitments they cannot sustain. Whether in investing, business, relationships, or self-improvement, excitement can make you overestimate your abilities and underestimate consequences. Smart thinkers pair excitement with patience. They allow excitement to inspire action, but not dictate it. Ego also plays a powerful role in emotional decision-making. Ego demands to be right. Ego demands to win. Ego demands recognition. The problem with ego-driven decisions is that they trade effectiveness for validation. They trade strategy for pride. They trade long-term advantage for short-term satisfaction. When ego is in control, losing a small argument feels like disaster, and winning it feels like victory, even if the victory costs something more important. Emotional mastery requires humility, not because humility makes you submissive, but because it makes you strategic. Pride fights for appearance, strategy fights for outcome. A major component of emotional intelligence is the ability to stay calm under pressure. Calmness is a competitive advantage. In any environment, business, negotiation, crisis, leadership, the calm person has more control over the situation because they have more control over themselves. Panic destroys problem-solving ability. Calmness preserves it. Panic makes you reactive. Calmness keeps you proactive. Here's a useful mental model. Never make decisions at emotional extremes. Don't make financial decisions when euphoric or terrified. Don't make relationship decisions when heartbroken or infatuated. Don't make career decisions when frustrated or bored. Wait until your internal weather stabilizes. Emotional storms make the world look distorted. When the storm passes, the landscape reveals itself accurately. To close this chapter, remember this: intelligence is not just measured by what you know, but by what you can resist. The smartest people are not those who never feel emotion. They feel deeply, but they don't let temporary feelings decide permanent consequences. When you master your emotions, you protect your judgment. When you protect your judgment, you protect your future. And that is one of the defining traits of someone who is becoming dangerously smart. Chapter 11. Develop tactical communication skills. The ability to think clearly is powerful, but the ability to communicate clearly multiplies that power. Being dangerously smart is not just about knowing what to do. It's about influencing outcomes, shaping perceptions, and transmitting ideas in a way that persuades, aligns, and moves people. Communication is leverage. It allows you to collaborate, negotiate, build alliances, avoid unnecessary conflict, and create opportunities that thinking alone could never manifest. However, most people communicate reactively. They speak to express emotion, not to achieve objectives. Tactical communication is different. It is intentional, measured, and strategic. The first principle of tactical communication is clarity. Unclear communication creates confusion, and confusion breeds conflict. Many arguments and misunderstandings don't come from disagreement. They come from ambiguity. Smart communicators say what they mean, without forcing others to decode hidden signals. They choose words that reduce room for misinterpretation. They frame their messages based on audience, not ego. Communication is not about sounding impressive. It's about being understood. The second principle is restraint. In communication, timing and dosage matter as much as content. Just because you can say something doesn't mean you should, and just because something is true doesn't mean it needs to be spoken immediately. Strategic communicators don't rush to fill silence. They listen, they observe, and they speak when it matters. Silence is not weakness, it is a tool. Silence forces others to reveal more. It compels negotiation partners to make the next move. It gives you space to think. The difference between impulsive communication and tactical communication is that one reacts, and the other positions. Listening is another high-level communication skill. Listening is how you gather information, understand context, and detect the subtext beneath words. Most people listen only enough to respond. Smart communicators listen enough to understand. They study tone, timing, hesitations, contradictions, and emotional signals. They pay attention to what is being said, but also to what is being avoided. Information hides in avoidance. When someone refuses to answer a question directly, they are answering it indirectly. When someone explains too much, they're often defending a weakness. Listening reveals more than talking ever will. Another essential part of communication is framing. Framing is the way you package a message. People respond less to the information itself and more to how it is framed. For example, telling someone, "You're wrong," invites resistance. Framing it as "here's another angle to consider," invites openness. The content might be identical, but the response is not. Framing determines whether an idea gets accepted, resisted, or ignored. Dangerously smart communicators understand psychology enough to choose frames that reduce friction. But communication is not only about conveying meaning, it's also about managing conflict. Conflict is inevitable, especially for people who are ambitious, strategic, or growth-oriented. Most people handle conflict emotionally, escalating small disagreements into large wars. Tactical communicators handle conflict with precision. They don't fight every battle. They don't react to every insult. They don't defend every accusation. They choose their conflicts the way a chess player chooses squares, intentionally. Sometimes the smartest move is to de-escalate. Sometimes the smartest move is to redirect. And sometimes the smartest move is to disengage completely. Influence is another layer of communication. Influence does not mean manipulation. Influence means getting others to act willingly, without force. Smart communicators do not demand, they guide. They don't overpower, they align incentives. They don't argue, they persuade. They understand that persuasion is not about winning points, it's about shifting viewpoints. They ask better questions rather than give long explanations. Questions force the other person to think. Explanation invites debate. Influence grows from alignment, not domination. Negotiation is advanced communication in action. In negotiation, everything matters: what is said, what is unsaid, the order of statements, the pace of the conversation, the posture of each party, and the alternatives each person has available. Good negotiators ask themselves, what does the other side actually want? What do they fear? What pressures are they under? What would make this a win for them? Dumb negotiators only care about what they want. Smart negotiators care about what will work. And then there is the communication of boundaries. Boundaries are essential because unmanaged communication leads to resentment, overcommitment, or exploitation. Boundaries are not walls, they are clarity. They protect priorities, energy, and time. Tactical communicators set boundaries early, clearly, and without apology. Boundaries become easier to enforce when stated calmly instead of defensively. When you say no without panic or justification, people learn to respect your limits. Finally, tactical communication requires self-awareness. You must understand how you come across, how your words are interpreted, and how your emotional tone shapes perception. Communication is not just what you say, it's how you say it, when you say it, and who you say it to. The smartest communicators adapt their language to context. They can speak simply to explain complex ideas. They can speak firmly to assert authority. They can speak softly to create trust. They can speak slowly to convey confidence. They can say nothing to maintain power. In the end, communication is not a luxury skill, it is a strategic advantage. It creates trust, resolves friction, influences outcomes, and opens doors. When you develop tactical communication skills, you stop losing opportunities because you meant well but said it wrong. You stop damaging relationships because you reacted emotionally. You stop getting misunderstood because you communicated ambiguously. And you begin to move through the world with a level of precision that makes intelligence visible, effective, and powerful. Chapter 12. Use time as a strategic weapon. Time is the currency everyone spends, but only a few know how to invest. If you study the lives of dangerously smart people, you'll notice something interesting. They do not merely manage time, they weaponize it. They use time to create advantage, to gain leverage, to compound skill, to outlast competition, and to escape the urgency traps that keep others stuck in the shallow end of life. While most people chase speed, strategic thinkers chase sequencing. While others ask, how fast can I get there? They ask, what is the smartest order of moves? To use time strategically, you must first understand that time is not equal for everyone. Two people can spend the same hour very differently, one producing progress, the other producing distraction. What makes the difference is not busyness, it's direction. Busyness is motion without strategy. Productivity is motion with intention. Leverage is motion with compounding. When you begin to think about time through those layers, you stop glorifying hustle and start respecting effectiveness. One of the most important time skills is prioritization. Most people treat tasks as if they carry the same weight, but in reality, very few tasks matter. A small number produce most of the impact, and a large number produce noise. The dangerously smart identify the vital few tasks that move the needle, the ones that create momentum, opportunity, or compounding returns. Everything else is either delayed, delegated, automated, or eliminated. Another aspect of using time as a weapon is understanding sequencing. Doing things in the wrong order slows you down, even if you're working hard. Most major breakthroughs come from correct sequencing, learning before acting, preparing before scaling, building before promoting. People waste time not because they're slow, but because they do things at the wrong stage. Smart thinkers ask, what must come first for the next step to be easier? That question alone saves years. There's also a deep connection between time and patience. Patience has a boring reputation, but strategically, it's an advantage multiplier. When you can wait longer than the average person, you can pursue opportunities others abandon too early. You can build skills others stop too soon. You can hold positions others exit from panic. Patience is not passive. It is disciplined endurance. It allows compounding to work in your favor. Impatience interrupts compounding just before it becomes powerful. Let's consider the opposite side, urgency. Urgency has a purpose, but it should not be your default mode. Constant urgency creates shallow thinking, rushed decisions, and frantic living. People under constant urgency don't plan, they don't reflect, and they don't position, they just react. When you live in reaction, you are always one step behind the situation. When you live in preparation, the situation rarely catches you off guard. Using time strategically means creating pockets of slowness in a world that worships speed. Another key time principle is compounding. Small decisions multiplied over long horizons create massive outcomes, good or bad. 10 pages a day turns into dozens of books. 10 minutes of skill practice becomes mastery over months and years. $10 invested consistently becomes wealth. The opposite is also true. 10 minutes of distraction, $10 of impulse spending, 10 days of procrastination. These compound negatively. The smart study compounding not just in finance, but in relationships, health, habits, and knowledge. Time also intersects with energy. A day is not measured in hours, it's measured in usable energy. You can waste 4 hours tired and accomplish nothing, or produce extraordinary work in 1 hour of high energy. Strategic people protect their energy windows. They know when they think best, when they focus best, and when they create best. They schedule important work during those peak windows, instead of letting them get consumed by meaningless tasks or reactive obligations. Now we need to talk about long-term versus short-term time horizons. Most people live in a 24-hour frame. Their decisions optimize for today, today's comfort, today's pleasure, today's relief. Strategic thinkers live in multi-year horizons. They ask, what does this look like in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? When you stretch your time horizon, your standards rise automatically. Short-term thinking makes comfort look attractive. Long-term thinking makes growth look necessary. Time is also a filter. When someone tells you what they value, ignore their words and look at their time. Time exposes priorities. If someone says health matters, but gives it 0 hours, it doesn't matter. If someone says learning matters, but invests nothing into it, it doesn't matter. Time reveals truth, because time cannot lie. Where you spend time determines who you become. Finally, using time as a weapon means eliminating time leaks. A time leak is any activity that consumes time without producing value. Drama is a time leak. Overthinking is a time leak. Envy is a time leak. Procrastination is a time leak. Unnecessary obligations are time leaks. Low-quality entertainment is a time leak. None of these destroy you quickly. They destroy you slowly, quietly, invisibly. They steal years in small increments. To close this chapter, understand this: the dangerously smart don't have more time. They treat time differently. They value it. They protect it. They invest it. They sequence it. They compound it. And because of that, they get more life out of their years, while others get more years out of their life, but less life in those years. When time becomes a weapon, you stop losing by default and start winning by design. Chapter 13. Build leverage. tools, skills, and people. One of the defining traits of dangerously smart thinkers is that they do not rely solely on brute force or personal effort. They understand that raw effort has limits. There are only so many hours you can work, so much energy you can expend, and so much attention you can give. Meanwhile, the problems of life, business, and personal growth often demand more than one person can supply through effort alone. That's where leverage comes in. Leverage is the ability to do more with less time, less energy, less effort, by intelligently using tools, skills, and people. Let's begin with tools. Tools are force multipliers. They allow you to accomplish tasks faster, better, and more consistently than you could by hand. Technology is an obvious category. Software automates tasks, machines increase output, and platforms create distribution. But tools are not only digital or mechanical. A calendar is a tool. A journal is a tool. A checklist is a tool. A system is a tool. Tools don't just increase productivity, they decrease friction. When friction is reduced, consistency becomes sustainable, and consistency is where results live. However, tools are only one form of leverage. Skills are another, and often an even more powerful one. Skills compound over time. The ability to communicate effectively, to sell, to negotiate, to write, to learn quickly, to manage emotions, to think strategically. These skills give you leverage because they apply across environments. A person with a highly leveraged skill doesn't need as many hours or as much effort to produce value. They produce value through quality, not just quantity. Consider communication as an example. Someone who can communicate clearly can align teams faster, persuade clients more effectively, resolve conflicts before they escalate, and teach concepts without confusion. That one skill saves hours, protects relationships, accelerates progress, and creates opportunities. Skill-based leverage is one of the highest return investments a person can make because skills travel with you everywhere. They are not tied to one job, one company, one city, or one era. But leverage becomes even more powerful when it involves people. People leverage is often misunderstood. It doesn't mean using people. It means collaborating intelligently. It means recognizing that no matter how talented you are, you cannot scale yourself to infinity. Smart thinkers build networks, alliances, teams, partnerships, and communities because they understand a simple truth. A solo player can be good, but coordinated players win championships. People leverage works through specialization. One person should not do everything. One person should do what they do best, while others do what they do best. That is how you increase output without increasing stress. When you surround yourself with capable people, your life expands. When you surround yourself with needy or chaotic people, your life contracts. The quality of people around you either accelerates or dilutes your trajectory. Now let's talk about another form of leverage, capital. Capital can be money, but it can also be credibility, reputation, brand, or trust. Money creates leverage because it can purchase time, talent, and tools. Reputation creates leverage because it attracts opportunities that others must chase. Trust creates leverage because it reduces friction in relationships and deals. Capital gives you optionality, and optionality is a form of intelligence. There is also leverage through distribution. Written words, recorded videos, software, systems, and products continue to work even when you are sleeping. That is time leverage. When you produce once, but it produces value repeatedly, you escape the trap of trading hours for outcomes. The dangerously smart think beyond one-to-one exchanges. They build assets that do the heavy lifting for them. However, leverage does not work without clarity. You cannot build leverage on confusion. You must know what you're trying to accomplish, what strengths you have, and what weaknesses must be replaced with tools or people. Leverage requires introspection. What should I stop doing myself? This is an uncomfortable question for many, because society encourages self-reliance. But self-reliance beyond a certain point becomes self-sabotage. Doing everything yourself feels noble, but is actually inefficient. Delegation, outsourcing, automation, and collaboration are not escapes from responsibility, they are evolutions of responsibility. Another point worth exploring: leverage demands patience. Tools must be learned, skills must be developed, people must be vetted and built into trust networks. None of that happens overnight. Short-term thinkers avoid leverage because they want immediate results. Long-term thinkers invest in leverage because they want exponential results. The return on leverage compounds slowly at first, then dramatically once the systems mature. But there is a final nuance. Leverage increases both upside and downside. If you use the wrong tools, you break things faster. If you develop the wrong skills, you misallocate energy. If you trust the wrong people, you amplify chaos. And if you build a reputation carelessly, it collapses under scrutiny. Leverage rewards responsibility and punishes recklessness. That is why dangerously smart people are selective. They choose tools carefully. They choose kills strategically. They choose people intentionally. In simple terms, leverage is the art of increasing output without increasing strain. It allows you to escape the limits of personal effort. Without leverage, success becomes a treadmill. You run hard, but go nowhere. With leverage, success becomes a staircase. You climb steadily, with each system supporting the next. And once leverage is in place, you begin to experience something most people never feel: the sensation of life getting easier as goals get bigger. Chapter 14. Think in systems, not events. Dangerously smart people don't just react to what's happening, they study how things happen. They understand that outcomes are not random isolated events, but the byproduct of systems. A system is a set of habits, incentives, structures, feedback loops, and relationships that consistently produce a certain result. When you think in systems, you stop being surprised by outcomes because you understand the underlying mechanics that produce them. When you think only in events, life feels chaotic and unpredictable. You celebrate luck when things go well and blame fate when things go poorly. Systems thinking replaces luck and fate with clarity and cause and effect. Let's take health as an example. Most people treat health as an event. They get sick and then react. They gain weight and then panic. They feel exhausted and then try to fix it immediately. But health is not an event. It is a system built on sleep, nutrition, stress, movement, and environment. When the system is healthy, the outcomes are predictable. When the system is broken, the outcomes are predictable too. The unpredictability exists only in the minds of those who refuse to see the system. Jobs, careers, and financial outcomes follow the same pattern. A promotion is not an event. It is the result of a system of skill building, visibility, consistency, communication, and value creation. Wealth is not an event. It is the result of a system that prioritizes earning, saving, investing, and compounding over a long period. Poverty is not an event. It is the result of a system too, although often one people didn't consciously design. When you think in systems, you start to ask better questions. What system is producing this outcome? And what levers in the system can I adjust to change the outcome? Systems thinking gives you an advantage because it forces you to zoom out. It makes you look beyond the symptom to the structure. Most solutions fail because they target symptoms. Someone procrastinates and tries to fix it with motivation. But procrastination is rarely a motivation problem. It is often a system problem built on unclear goals, poor planning, emotional avoidance, or fear of imperfection. Fixing the system eliminates the symptom without a dramatic battle of willpower. Another benefit to systems thinking is that it reveals feedback loops. Feedback loops are forces that reinforce or weaken certain behaviors over time. Positive feedback loops make strength stronger. Negative feedback loops make weaknesses worse. For example, the more someone practices a skill, the more confidence they gain, which makes them practice more, which increases their skill further. That's a positive feedback loop. On the negative side, the more someone avoids a challenge, the more anxiety grows, which makes avoidance more likely, which increases anxiety again. When you see feedback loops, you can intervene at the right point instead of treating the outcome as fate. Dangerously smart thinkers also understand incentives. Incentives drive behavior more reliably than rules or values. If you want to change a system, yours or someone else's, change the incentives. People do what they are rewarded for and avoid what they are punished for. This principle explains corporate politics, economic trends, social movements, leadership failures, and even personal habits. When incentives change, behavior changes. Event thinkers blame people, system thinkers adjust incentives. There is also a psychological layer here. Systems thinking reduces emotional volatility. When you understand the mechanics behind situations, you panic less. You blame less. You react less. You observe more. A systems thinker doesn't ask who is at fault. First they ask, what structure produced this? That shift from personal blame to structural analysis creates better solutions and fewer conflicts. Thinking in systems also helps you avoid the trap of single variable thinking. Life is multifactorial. Outcomes rarely come from one cause. Someone who fails at business may think, my product wasn't good, when the real problem was distribution, pricing, marketing, timing, or trust. Single variable thinkers focus on the most visible cause and miss the others. System thinkers examine the web of causes, and when you understand the web, solutions become more effective and more sophisticated. Systems thinking additionally empowers long-term planning. When you understand how something works, you can predict how it will behave. Prediction is not about fortune-telling, it's about cause and effect. For example, if you build a system that rewards reading, note-taking, reflection and application, you can predict an increase in intelligence over years. If you build a system that rewards scrolling, avoiding discomfort, and seeking stimulation, you can predict a decrease in attention span and resilience. The outcomes are not mysterious. They are systems playing out on schedule. Perhaps the most transformative part of systems thinking is that it allows you to design your life instead of just experiencing it. You become less reactive and more architectural. You ask, what system would produce the life I want, and then you begin building it in pieces. This is how dangerously smart people create consistency without relying on motivation. Motivation is useful, but unreliable. Systems are reliable. When the system is built well, results become automatic. To close this chapter, remember this: events are noisy, but systems are quiet. Events grab attention, but systems determine direction. If you want to change your life, stop trying to change single moments. Change the system that produces the moments. When you think in systems, life stops feeling chaotic and becomes something you can understand, influence, and ultimately shape with intention. Chapter 15. Learn how to learn. If you want to become dangerously smart, there is one skill that surpasses all others: the ability to learn quickly, deeply, and independently. Knowledge becomes outdated. Industries evolve. Technology disrupts. Strategies expire. But the person who knows how to learn stays relevant, adaptable, and competitive while everyone else struggles to keep up. Learning how to learn is the ultimate meta skill. Once you have it, every other skill becomes easier to acquire. Most people assume they already know how to learn because they went to school. But schools often teach memorization, not learning. They reward repetition, not understanding. They test short-term recall, not long-term application. True learning is different. It expands your capabilities. It changes how you think. It allows you to solve problems you couldn't solve before. It gives you new tools to interact with reality. Memorization fades. Transformation remains. The first principle of learning is curiosity. Curiosity drives exploration. When you're curious, learning stops feeling like work and starts feeling like discovery. Curiosity asks, why does this work? And what happens if I try this? And how could this be improved? Curiosity turns the world into a laboratory. Without curiosity, learning becomes mechanical and shallow. With curiosity, learning becomes natural and self-sustaining. The second principle is connection. Your brain doesn't store information as isolated facts. It stores it as networks. The more connections you create between ideas, the faster you learn and the better you remember. Smart thinkers constantly connect new information to existing frameworks. They ask, what does this remind me of? And where else does this apply? And how does this fit with what I already know? The brain loves patterns. Patterns create meaning. Meaning makes learning stick. Another key principle is focus. Learning requires attention, and attention is scarce in the modern world. Most people try to learn while multitasking, scrolling, or in environments full of noise. But multitasking fragments cognition. Deep learning requires deep focus. It requires shutting down distractions long enough for the brain to fully process information. A single hour of focused learning beats 5 hours of scattered exposure. The next principle is feedback. Feedback accelerates learning because it closes the gap between what you think you're doing and what you're actually doing. Musicians learn faster with instructors. Athletes learn faster with coaches. Writers learn faster with editors. But feedback isn't only external, it can be internal too. Self-feedback comes from reflection, journaling, reviewing mistakes, and analyzing outcomes. People who learn slowly often repeat the same errors because they never stop to examine them. People who learn quickly extract lessons with ruthless precision. Let's add an overlooked factor: error tolerance. Many people are terrified of making mistakes. They treat mistakes as proof of incompetence. Dangerous thinkers treat mistakes as information. Every mistake reveals a boundary or limitation in your current understanding. If you get offended by mistakes, the learning stops. If you get curious about mistakes, the learning accelerates. The fastest learners are often the ones with the highest error tolerance, because they accumulate feedback rapidly, while others hesitate. Another principle of learning is iteration. Learning is not a single exposure. It is repeated exposure with improvement in between. Iteration makes learning compound. You try, you adjust, you refine, you try again. Skills developed through iteration become durable. Skills developed through cramming become brittle. This is why practice outperforms theory. Theory introduces ideas, practice introduces reality. We must also talk about compression. Modern intelligence requires the ability to compress large amounts of information into simple, usable frameworks. Without compression, knowledge becomes overwhelming. With compression, knowledge becomes powerful. For example, instead of remembering 50 rules about money, you might remember one principle about compounding. Instead of memorizing endless rules about communication, you might remember one framework about clarity and framing. Compression frees cognitive space for problem solving instead of memorizing. Now consider speed. Learning fast isn't about rushing, it's about efficiency. Asking questions speeds up learning. Seeking mentors speeds up learning. Taking notes speeds up learning. Teaching others speeds up learning even more, because teaching forces clarity. If you can teach something simply, you understand it. If you cannot teach it, you likely don't. This is why teaching is the final test of learning. Environment also shapes learning. Certain environments encourage exploration, dialogue, experimentation, and curiosity, while others punish mistakes, discourage questions, or reward conformity. Smart learners either change their environment or create one. They find rooms where growth is normal, not exceptional. They find peers who push them upward, not sideways or downward. Environment is leverage for learning. Finally, learning how to learn leads to adaptability. When the world changes, those who rely on old knowledge become outdated. Those who rely on learning become upgraded. They move into new roles, new industries, new opportunities, because they trust their ability to acquire what's needed. In a world of rapid change, adaptability is more valuable than expertise frozen in time. To close this chapter, remember this: intelligence is not static, it is elastic. You can stretch it, you can train it, you can refine it, you can accelerate it. And once you learn how to learn, the world becomes less intimidating, because you are no longer limited to what you know today. You gain confidence in your ability to grow into who you need to become tomorrow. That is the essence of becoming dangerously smart. Conclusion. Becoming dangerously smart is not about appearing superior, winning arguments, or collecting intellectual trophies. It's about moving through the world with clarity, strategy, foresight, and emotional stability. It's about understanding how things work beneath the surface, how people think, how systems operate, how decisions compound, how patterns repeat, and how leverage multiplies outcomes. A dangerously smart person isn't necessarily the loudest in the room. Often, they are the one who observes quietly, acts intentionally, and positions themselves where the odds favor them. Throughout this audiobook, you've explored many dimensions of strategic intelligence: the power of clarity, the value of information, the usefulness of long-term thinking, the importance of pattern recognition, the advantage of anticipation, the discipline of emotional control, the leverage of communication, the weapon of time, the structure of systems, and the meta skill of learning. None of these are mystical talents. They are learnable, they are trainable, they are repeatable, and when combined, they create something formidable. Dangerously smart people do not depend solely on talent. They build frameworks, they build habits, they build systems, they build leverage. They don't try to win through force, they try to win through understanding. They don't rely on motivation, they rely on structure. They don't wait for luck, they create opportunities through preparation and positioning. And most importantly, they take responsibility for their minds. They treat thinking as a skill instead of a background process. If there is one thing worth remembering as you close this audiobook, it's this: intelligence is not fixed. It is designed. You design it through what you consume, what you question, what you practice, and what you avoid. You design it through the conversations you engage in, the environments you choose, the standards you uphold, and the problems you volunteer to solve. Every choice, even the small ones, shapes the architecture of your thinking. The world around you rewards shallow attention, quick reactions, emotional impulsiveness, and short-term gratification. But the world also quietly rewards those who resist those temptations, those who are willing to observe instead of rush, to think instead of assume, to build instead of consume, and to learn instead of perform. Dangerous intelligence lies in that resistance. It lies in choosing depth in a shallow world, precision in a messy world, and strategy in a reactive world. As you move forward, do not feel pressured to apply everything at once. Intelligence compounds slowly, thinking evolves with exposure, systems develop through iteration. Start with awareness, then build habits, then refine, then repeat. Improvement doesn't need to be dramatic to be transformative. A 1% increase in clarity, a 1% improvement in observation, a 1% upgrade in decision-making over time. These increments quietly rewrite your trajectory. The future belongs to those who can think, truly think, not just recall information, but interpret it, not just react to life, but anticipate it, not just survive change, but adapt to it. Becoming dangerously smart is not about dominating others, it's about mastering yourself and navigating life with intelligence that produces results. If you choose to continue this journey, the tools are here, the frameworks are here, and the responsibility is yours, and that is exactly where it should be.